just recording. We're on to the next topic within our current unit, and what we are going to do is seems like quite a nice, simple, easy thing to start with. It does start getting a little bit, not necessarily difficult, but sort of tricky to get your brain around when the calculations start building up. But we're going to use absolute value. Does anyone know about absolute value already?
It does not matter whether it's positive or negative. The absolute value is the number behind your positive or negative.
Okay, so in a slightly different way, absolute value is the distance of a number from 0. Why do we say it like that, or why does that match exactly with what Gordon's saying? Well, if we were to draw a little number line, and if I put 0 in the middle and I put the number 8 there, which other number is exactly the same distance from 8? From 0. Yeah, negative 8. So negative 8 is the opposite of 8, and they are both a distance of 8 from 0. Okay, so that's all absolute value is. Now, some people will say, "Oh, you just always ignore the negative," which potentially can be used, but there are potential issues if you remember just that. Okay? But that's basically what absolute value is. We look at the number that we're given and we state how far that away is from 0. What applications can that have in real life? Any ideas?
How much you're in that?
Pardon?
How much you're in that for?
And how would that be? I agree. So how would that work?
Like, if your bank account says like negative 1,000 or whatever, you make 1,000.
Okay, so yeah, we could talk about like financial situation. If exactly what it said is bank account. If you look at the actual screen, it could say negative whatever, but actually we would use different vocabulary. The actual number we would use is the just 1,000. How far below 0 am I? And we would use the word yet. So that how far above or below 0 I am. Yep. Any others that you can think of? Well, do you know what? There might be subtle applications. Sometimes there will be things that we could express as a positive or negative, and we just don't bother. We only think about the number, the distance. Say distance. So, for instance, if I consider here as my origin point, so Summersfield, if I head towards Hamilton or I head towards Flats, am I going in opposite directions? If I asked you for a position, okay, relative to the school, would you say Flats is a positive number and Hamilton is a negative number, or would you just say we are this distance away from school? Yeah. So we don't bother with we're in a negative direction. We just say we have other ways of expressing it, such as east and west, right? Comes up a lot on this island, east and west. Go on.
If you really wanted to get technical about it, you could say that Flats is in a positive direction because it's to the east, and on what is it? Global coordinates, east is positive.
Yep.
But
in the same way, if we do a grid system like in New York, all right, is there a road that is considered 0? No? Or you don't know?
I genuinely don't know.
Don't know? Well, do you know how they name the streets in America quite often? Where you have such and such west and such as east, right? And how do we have that? Well, there must be a road in the middle that is neither east or west, right? I think in New York, is it like Fifth Avenue is like considered? Because you've got the vertical ones which are first, second, third, fourth, fifth, yeah? And then you have the other ones going east to west. And actually, depending on which side of a particular road you're on, you are either on East 31st Street or you're on West 31st Street. Now, technically, we could number them as, well, if you live on this side, you are the positive numbers. If you are this side, you're on the negative, but we don't do that. We tend to do positive numbers, but we say you're on the west, you're on the east. So there are times where we do only consider a distance. We don't worry about whether we are positive or negative. In fact, quite often, because negative values don't mean an awful lot to us in a lot of situations. All right, so we do have uses. What we're going to do now is we're going to simplify it and just say, right, you've just got to be able to work out some values that are absolute value. Does anyone know what the notation for absolute value is? You've got examples right in front of you, as Taylor's saying. So the absolute value is shown by those two vertical straight lines. They're not brackets. They're vertical straight lines. So when you see that, so this is on your first sheet, when you see that situation there, it's saying, what is the absolute value of 5? And that is basically interpreted as how far is 5 away from 0? So it's literally just 5 is your answer. And then we look at the absolute value of negative 13 is 13. This is why people say, oh, you just write the number down without the negatives. Okay. All right, so that first sheet is really, you should be able to rattle through, but before you just do, let's have a look at, I don't think I've got these in the right order. That's not your number 2, is it? Can you turn over to your next sheet and show us what? Yeah. Right, so, that's your next sheet, isn't it? All right, now, why is this sheet considered the next one on? What's different about it? Dana? Yeah. You'll notice that, I mean, this one's nice and easy, is it? Absolute value of 4 is 4. Absolute value of negative 13 is 13. But this is negative absolute value of 10. So it's negative 10. That's why we do have to be a bit careful that we don't, oh, you just don't write the negatives. Because if the minus sign is outside, okay, and looking at 4, what do you think the potential problem is with 4?
Still
Double negative.
Double negatives. And what do people know about double negatives?
Positive.
2 negatives make a positive, so the answer to this could be 7. Is it? No. Because we do the absolute value of negative 7 first, which is 7, and then we take minus that, negative 7. Okay. Now, just because I do just want to let you get on with it, you will notice that is this your, what's your third one? I did try and put it, not this one. Get more okay. This is where we start making some calculations with it. And this is why I say, to be honest, you have to start getting your head around it a little bit. Sort of think about it a little bit. So, for instance, this first one, okay? Is that what time you said?
He did say 11:50.
This first one then, do you need to go? What do we do here?
The absolute value of 6 and the absolute value of 2.
Yeah, so this one becomes 6 minus 2, which is 4. And again, the reason why I want to make the point is if we look at 4, look, we've got a negative and a negative, and some people think, oh, if you subtract a negative, you plus. But we don't, do we? because the absolute value of negative 13 is 13, and the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. So we're actually just doing 13 subtract 12, which is 1. Okay? So it does affect things a little bit. Now, I'm sure at this stage, right, you might be thinking, okay, well, what about these harder ones? Well, if we have a look at, let's look at this one, number 1. You all on this sheet with me now? Now we get to this stage and we might have to start writing some stuff down in our books. What do you think? Good?
The absolute value, the negative absolute value of negative 2 multiplied by the absolute.
So what's the first bit then? This is, so that's negative 2 multiplied by
40.
9 times 5.
Okay, so we've got to do the BODMAS thing. So negative 9 times, now we don't do, although I don't know whether it makes a difference or not. But it probably doesn't, does it? We can do negative 9 times 5 is negative 45, and we take the absolute value of that result.
And divide by 3.
Now that is not going to make any difference because it's a multiplication, but if we do have addition inside, you might need to think of it a little bit different. So we end up with absolute value of negative 45 is positive 45 divided by 3 times 7. Okay? So we've dealt with all the absolute value stuff. Now we've got a simple multiplication, which ends up being negative 2 times 15 times 7.
That is negative 30 times 7 is negative 210. Quick math.
So, again, I will just draw your attention to the fact that people think absolute value questions can never be negative. Well, this one can be, right? You all right? You've got a load of questions to throw out through. You've got a question? Why is it negative? Because we've got this one here. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2, but we've got minus that, so it makes minus 2. So now I've got a negative times positive is negative. Yeah? Okay, I'll let you get on.